On a quiet and misty morning at Arlington National Cemetery, the sound of steady footsteps echoed across the marble walkway. Tomb Guard Sergeant Matthew Cole marched in perfect rhythm, his uniform spotless, his face calm, his focus unbroken. For him, every step, every turn, and every second spent guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier carried deep meaning. It was not just a duty, it was a promise to honor those who could no longer speak for themselves. That morning seemed like any other. Visitors stood at a respectful distance, watching the precision and discipline of the tomb guards. The air was still, and the only sound was the faint rustle of leaves in the trees. But just as Matthew completed his turn and prepared to march, again something caught his eye, a small metallic object lying near the edge of the marble path. At first he thought it was just a piece of trash or a coin dropped by a visitor. But when he looked closer, he saw that it was something different. A military badge, old and weathered, with edges dulled by time. The sunlight glimmered softly off its surface, and he could make out faint engravings that looked like a unit symbol from decades ago. Matthew's training told him not to touch anything near the tomb without reporting it. Guards followed strict rules and nothing was ever done out of order. But as he looked at the badge, something inside him hesitated. The badge didn't look like it had just been dropped. It looked like it had been placed there. Gently, carefully, he stooped down and picked it up. The badge felt heavy in his hand, though it was small. There was a crack running through the center, and the once bright metal had turned dull and greenish with age. He flipped it over and saw tiny, barely readable letters, 1944. His chest tightened a little. That was the year of some of the fiercest battles in World War II. For a moment, the noise around him disappeared. He imagined an old soldier holding that badge proudly on his uniform, standing tall among his comrades. He imagined the dust, the noise, and the bravery of men who never came home. When his shift ended, Matthew couldn't stop thinking about the badge. He went to the guard quarters, washed his hands, and sat on the bench for a moment, staring at the small piece of metal in his palm. He knew he should have turned it in immediately, but a strong feeling told him this was something personal. Something sacred. Maybe it had fallen from someone visiting, or maybe it had been left on purpose as a tribute. That night, he placed the badge on his bedside table. The dim light from the lamp made the small emblem glow softly, and for the first time in years, Matthew felt something beyond his duty. Curiosity mixed with respect. He wanted to know who this badge belonged to, and why it had been left at the tomb. Matthew wasn't just any guard. Before joining the Tomb Guard unit, he had served overseas and lost a close friend in combat. That experience had made him appreciate what the tomb represented: sacrifice, honor, and eternal respect. Looking at the badge reminded him of his fallen friend, and it made him think about all the unnamed heroes who had never received recognition. The next day, he couldn't help but look again at the spot where he had found the badge. He imagined the person who might have left it, perhaps an elderly veteran, walking slowly with a cane, leaving behind one last memory of his unit. Or maybe a family member of a lost soldier, trying to feel closer to someone long gone. Each thought made his curiosity grow stronger. During his lunch break, he carefully cleaned the badge using a soft cloth. As the dirt came off, a symbol slowly appeared, a star surrounded by a pair of wings. It looked familiar, but Matthew couldn't place where he had seen it before. He searched through a few old military reference books kept in the guard office, but found nothing that matched perfectly. That night, after duty, he went home and opened his laptop. He started searching online for old U.S. Army unit badges from the 1940s. Hours passed. One by one, he compared pictures, studied engravings, and followed links. Finally, he found something close. A badge used by a World War II division known for their bravery in Europe. His heart began to race. This wasn't just any random badge. It belonged to a soldier who might have fought in one of the hardest battles of the war. Matthew leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen. Whoever left it at the tomb had done so with purpose. He thought about reporting it then, but something inside told him to wait just a little longer. He wanted to find the story behind it before handing it over. He felt that if he could uncover its meaning, Maybe he could honor the person behind it in a deeper way. Every time he looked at the badge, it seemed to speak without words. It carried a message of courage, sacrifice, and memory. And though Matthew didn't know the full story yet, he felt a connection to the unknown soldier who had once worn it. In the following days, he became more focused on his silent mission. Every march at the tomb reminded him of the men and women who had given everything for their country. And now, this small badge had become a bridge between the past and the present, between forgotten stories and those who still remembered. Sometimes, while standing guard under the bright sun or the gentle rain, he would glance toward the marble stone and feel that someone unseen was watching, perhaps the very soldier whose badge he now held. He didn't yet know that his decision to keep that badge would soon lead him on a journey that would touch the hearts of many, a journey that would reveal a forgotten story, reunite a family, and remind the world that no act of remembrance is ever too small. But for now, as he placed the badge carefully back into his pocket before returning to duty, one thought stayed clear in his mind. This was not just an object. It was a piece of history, and somehow, fate had chosen him to find it. That night, Matthew couldn't sleep. The image of the old badge stayed in his mind like a quiet voice calling for attention. It was as if the small piece of metal carried a story that wanted to be told, a story that had waited too long in silence. He sat at his desk with a notebook and began writing down every detail he could remember: the symbol, the numbers, the scratches, and the year 1944. He had no idea that this small act of curiosity would soon uncover a forgotten chapter of history. Over the next few days, whenever Matthew wasn't on duty, he spent his time searching. He looked through military archives online, old war division lists, and veteran discussion pages. Sometimes the information led nowhere, but he refused to give up. His heart told him that there was something special about this badge. One evening, while scrolling through a list of old military insignias, he finally found a match. The same star with wings symbol appeared in a black and white photograph of a World War II unit called the 91st Infantry Division. They had fought in Italy during some of the toughest battles in 1944. The name under the photograph read, Badge of Honor, 91st Infantry. Matthew leaned forward, feeling a surge of excitement. He whispered to himself, "So this belonged to someone from the 91st. He continued reading through old reports and news clippings. Many soldiers from that division were never found after a brutal fight near the Arno River. As he read those words, his heart grew heavy. The badge in his hand was not just an object. It was likely a part of someone's story that had ended on a foreign battlefield, far from home. The next day, he decided to go deeper. He contacted an old friend who worked at the Army Historical Records Office. "Hey, I need your help," Matthew said over the phone. "I found something near the tomb, an old badge. I think it's from the 91st Infantry. Can you check if anyone from that division went missing in 1944 with that specific insignia?" His friend paused. "That's a tall order, Matt. There were hundreds." "I know," Matthew replied softly, "but maybe one record will stand out. Maybe it will feel unfinished." A few days later, his friend called back. "You might want to hear this," he said. "There was a private named Harold Greer. His service record says he was reported missing in action near Florence in 1944. He received a posthumous medal, but his remains were never found. He served in the 91st Infantry Division." Matthew froze. The name echoed in his mind. He quickly searched the name online and found a faded newspaper clipping from 1945. It showed a young soldier smiling in uniform, his badge shining proudly on his chest. The caption read, "Private Harold Greer, missing but never forgotten by his family." Matthew stared at the photo for a long time. It was him. It had to be. Somehow this badge had found its way to the tomb after all these years. But how? Who had brought it there? He wanted to know more. He continued digging until he found a small record that mentioned a next of kin, Eleanor Greer, listed as Harold's sister. The address was decades old, but it was a start. Matthew searched through public records and finally found a phone number linked to a house in Virginia. His heart pounded as he dialed the number. After a few rings, a frail voice answered, "Hello? Ma'am, my name is Sergeant Matthew Cole. I'm calling from Arlington National Cemetery." I found something that might belong to your family." There was silence for a moment. Then the woman replied softly, "Oh dear, did you say Arlington?" Her voice trembled slightly. "My brother fought in the war. He never came home. His name was Harold." "Yes, ma'am," Matthew said gently. "I believe this badge may have belonged to him. I found it near the tomb of the unknown soldier. Did someone from your family visit recently?" The old woman was quiet for a long time. Then he heard her whisper, "I did, last week. I left his badge there." Matthew sat completely still. His throat felt tight. "You left it?" he asked softly. "Yes," she said. "It was the only thing of his I had left. My father kept it after the war. When he passed away, he told me to keep it safe. But I'm old now, Sergeant. I wanted my brother to rest among the brave and where he belongs." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I thought if I left it there, maybe his spirit would finally find peace." Matthew couldn't speak for a moment. He felt something deep inside, respect, sorrow, and admiration all at once. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "your brother's story deserves to be remembered. Would it be all right if I shared it with my command?" Eleanor hesitated. "Do you really think anyone would care after all these years?" Matthew smiled softly, though she couldn't see it. "Yes, ma'am, I care. And I think others will too." After the call ended, he sat in silence for a long time, holding the badge once again. Now he knew the truth. It was not lost, it was placed there out of love and remembrance. But he also knew that such a powerful story couldn't stay hidden. He wanted to honor both Harold and Eleanor for their quiet strength. The next morning, Matthew reported the discovery to his commanding officer, Major Thompson. He explained everything, how he had found the badge, his research, and his conversation with Eleanor Greer. He expected to be scolded for not following proper procedure right away. Instead, the major listened carefully, his eyes thoughtful. When Matthew finished, Major Thompson stood up, walked to the window, and looked toward the tomb in silence. Finally, he said, "You did something most men wouldn't have. You followed your heart. Let's make sure this story is told the right way." Hearing those words filled Matthew with relief. He realized he hadn't just broken a rule. He had uncovered a forgotten act of love and remembrance. That evening, he called Eleanor again to tell her that Arlington would honor her brother properly. The old woman began to cry softly on the phone. "Thank you, Sergeant," she whispered. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost. Hope." Matthew smiled and said, "It's my honor, ma'am. Your brother will finally get the recognition he deserves." As he hung up, he looked once more at the badge, now polished and shining again. It no longer looked like a forgotten relic. It looked alive, glowing with the spirit of the soldier who once wore it proudly. He placed it gently in a velvet box, ready to return it to its rightful place, not as a lost item, but as a symbol of remembrance. What had started as a small act of curiosity had turned into a powerful connection between generations, a bridge of respect that reached from the past into the present. And deep down, Matthew knew this was only the beginning. Something greater was about to happen. Something that would touch not just him and Eleanor, but everyone who ever stood before the tomb of the unknown soldier. The morning of the ceremony arrived with a calm and golden sunrise over Arlington National Cemetery. The white marble stones seemed to shine brighter than usual, as if they too were ready to witness something special. Tomb Guard Sergeant Matthew Cole stood quietly near the tomb of the unknown soldier, holding a small velvet box in his gloved hands. Inside it rested the old soldier's badge, now cleaned, repaired, and restored with care. The same badge that had once lain forgotten on the marble ground was now about to become part of something meaningful and eternal. It had been a few weeks since Matthew had first found the badge. During that time, the story of Private Harold Greer had slowly spread among the guards, officers, and even visitors. People were moved by how one man's simple act of remembrance, an old sister, leaving her brother's badge, and had brought a long-lost story back to life. Eleanor Greer had been invited to attend a special ceremony arranged by the cemetery officials. It was not something done often, but everyone agreed that this story deserved it. The badge would be placed in a display case near the tomb, along with a small plaque to honor both Harold and all the soldiers whose stories had been lost to time. As the small crowd began to gather, Matthew adjusted his uniform and looked toward the path leading to the tomb. A slow-moving wheelchair came into view, pushed by a young volunteer. Sitting in it was an elderly woman wrapped in a light shawl, Eleanor Greer. Her eyes were filled with both sadness and pride as she looked at the grand marble monument ahead. She clutched a faded photograph of her brother in one hand. When she reached the front, Matthew stepped forward and saluted her. "Ma'am," he said softly, "welcome to Arlington." Eleanor looked up at him with a kind smile. "You must be Sergeant Cole," she said. "The one who found Harold's badge?" "Yes, ma'am," Matthew replied. "It's an honor to meet you." Her eyes grew moist as she whispered, "It's an honor to see someone still cares." The ceremony began with the sound of the bugle playing softly in the distance. The wind was gentle, carrying with it the peaceful scent of autumn leaves. Soldiers stood in perfect formation, and visitors bowed their heads in silence. Every heart seemed to feel the weight of the moment. The master of ceremonies stepped forward and began to speak. He told the story of how the badge had been discovered by a tomb guard, how it had once belonged to Private Harold Greer, and how his sister had left it here out of love. He spoke about how remembrance sometimes hides in small acts, a letter, a medal, a badge, and how those small acts can carry great meaning. As he spoke, Eleanor closed her eyes. Her mind went back to the 1940s, to a day when her brother had left home in his army uniform, waving goodbye from the train station. He had promised to come back, but he never did. For years she had prayed for news, and when none came, she kept his badge as her treasure. And now, after all those years, she was finally here to see him honored properly. When the time came, Matthew stepped forward with the velvet box. His hands were steady, but his heart was full. He opened the box slowly, and the sunlight caught the metal just right, making it glimmer as if alive once more. He placed it carefully inside a glass case near the tomb. Beneath it was a small golden plaque that read, "Private Harold Greer, 91st Infantry Division." Dawi. For those whose stories time nearly forgot, a quiet hush fell over the crowd. For several moments no one spoke or moved. The air felt thick with emotion, pride, sorrow, and deep respect all blending into one silent tribute. Even the guards, who were trained never to show emotion while on duty, seemed to stand a little straighter, as if saluting not just the unknown, but all who had served unseen. Eleanor wiped her tears with a trembling hand. "He would be so proud," she whispered. Matthew bent slightly toward her and said, "He is, ma'am, and so are we." After the ceremony, several visitors came up to Eleanor, thanking her for sharing her brother's story. Some said it reminded them of their own family members who had served and never returned. Others said it gave them hope, proof that no act of love ever truly disappears. A news photographer quietly took a picture of Eleanor sitting near the tomb, her brother's photo in her lap, and the badge gleaming in the background. That picture would later appear in newspapers across the country, touching hearts everywhere. People began writing letters to Arlington, sharing their own stories of family members who had fought in wars long ago. For Matthew, the ceremony changed something deep inside him. He had always understood duty, but now he understood something more, connection. The tomb was not only a symbol of the unknown, it was a bridge that joined the living with the fallen. He realized that behind every name, every uniform, and every medal, there was a human story waiting to be remembered. As the day drew to a close, Eleanor asked Matthew for one small favor. "Could I touch the badge one last time?" she asked softly. He nodded and carefully opened the glass case. With gentle hands, she touched the cool metal, her fingers trembling slightly. "You're home now, Harold," she whispered. "You're finally home." Matthew felt a lump rise in his throat. He looked away for a moment, staring at the horizon where the sunlight touched the endless rows of white headstones. The view was silent, yet it spoke louder than any words ever could. Later that evening, after the visitors had left and the guards returned to their quiet watch, Matthew stood alone before the tomb. The sound of the wind brushed softly against his uniform. He saluted once more, not out of routine but out of gratitude. He thought about how one small badge had brought together the past and the present. It had reminded everyone that remembrance is not only found in grand monuments or ceremonies, but also in the smallest gestures. A sister's love, a soldier's promise, a guard's curiosity. As the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long, Matthew whispered to himself, "Every story deserves to be remembered." From that day forward, whenever he took his post at the tomb, He carried not just his rifle and uniform, but also the silent story of Private Harold Greer in his heart. The badge in the glass case became more than an artifact. It became a symbol of hope and honor, shining quietly for all who visited Arlington to see. And so, in that peaceful place of heroes, the old soldier's badge found its final resting place, not buried in the ground, but living in the hearts of those who would never forget.